What does it actually mean when a nation faces repeated shocks across 2 decades? We're talking terror attacks, tense border standoffs, massive intelligence gaps, and some really profound questions about how sovereign power is deployed. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're critically examining the very anatomy of India's national security through Manish Tewari's seminal book, 10 Flashpoints, 20 Years. Now, this isn't merely a recounting of historical events, it is a clinical, hard look at exactly how the Indian state responds to crises. It measures the triumphs, the omissions, and the institutional culture that ultimately dictates survival in a highly volatile region.
Okay, let's dive into this. When we examine the crises that have tested India over the past 20 years, a really profound question emerges. What happens when the undeniable courage of frontline soldiers just isn't backed by an equally robust institutional structure? Tewari's analysis forces an uncomfortable reflection, challenging us to look past the valor of the armed forces, which is unquestionable, and deeply scrutinize the administrative and political machinery operating in the shadows.
Section 1. The Architecture of National Security and the Limits of Isolated Bravery.
You see, the opening thesis of our source material makes one thing abundantly clear. National security absolutely cannot be outsourced solely to the military. A true national security system, well, it's a massive, interconnected ecosystem. We're talking diplomacy, intelligence, the armed forces, political decision-making, and strategic communication. When these pillars operate in isolated silos, decisions become purely reactive rather than anticipatory. A nation might possess immense battlefield courage, but without a unified structure, that courage risks being completely squandered in the chaos of a sudden emergency.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 2, Preparedness, Mobilization, and Strategy, the Lessons of Kargil and Parakram. The book juxtaposes 2 defining historical moments that I'm sure you're familiar with. First, the 1999 Kargil War. It demonstrated incredible tactical bravery and a rapid systemic mobilization once the threat was finally recognized. Yet, it starkly exposed some very dangerous initial gaps in surveillance. Then, fast forward to the 2001 Parliament attack, and we see Operation Parakram. Now, this involved a massive military mobilization, but it resulted in severe operational strain. And crucially, it lacked clarity regarding the ultimate political end state.
This brings us to a powerful realization about the sheer cost of hesitation. Military force must always be tied to a clear political purpose. Mobilization is a strategic act. If a massive deployment drags on without a decisive political outcome, the holding posture inadvertently becomes the message to adversaries. Bravery, without constant vigilance and a crystal-clear chain of command, literally leaves the state apparatus highly vulnerable to strategic surprise.
Section 3. Intelligence Gaps and Institutional Inertia, the Bureaucratic Challenge.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. Moving from the battlefield to the hidden corridors of power, we encounter a severe structural vulnerability. Having multiple intelligence agencies often leads to overlapping mandates and dangerous duplication. Gathering raw data is entirely insufficient, actually, scratch that, it's practically useless if it doesn't translate into a shared, actionable worldview. Intelligence is only as powerful as its ability to be validated and rapidly moved into the hands of decision-makers before a crisis strikes.
Tewari presents a very sharp critique here. National security often fails not at the level of grand policy, but in the mundane, day-to-day details of process. A general's bureaucracy heavily layered in administrative inertia frequently resists even incremental security reforms. The sobering reality is that the best strategic intentions in the world can be completely stalled by paperwork. Battlefield agility requires an administrative spine that is equally flexible, not resistant.
Section 4. Terror, Restraint, and Strategic Deterrence, the Shadow of 2611.
This is perhaps the most heavily debated and frankly emotionally charged segment of the analysis. Consider the rapid escalation timeline of November 2008. Within hours, a devastating terror attack strikes the heart of Mumbai. Over the following days, the highest levels of government engage in a tense, rigorous debate over a kinetic military response. As weeks pass, the ultimate decision settles on restraint. This timeline highlights a critical truth. Quick decision thresholds are absolute requirements in establishing a nation's posture after a massive shock.
Now, Tewari offers a highly critical assessment of this timeline. He argues that in the raw, unforgiving calculus of geopolitics, restraint was perceived by adversaries not as statesmanship, but as weakness. His position is that India should have considered a kinetic response following the attacks. I want to be clear, we are impartially reporting his stance here, which highlights a grim strategic reality. When a state suffers a massive strike and doesn't respond physically, adversaries might just interpret that restraint as strategic hesitation.
So the crucial point is this: deterrence isn't a one-way street. It only works when the opponent fully believes in the doctrine, the capability, and the political will to use force. India's strategic ambiguity, particularly regarding its nuclear doctrine and its hesitation to escalate, profoundly impacted regional signaling. While strategic ambiguity can offer some diplomatic flexibility, it also creates a dangerous vacuum of uncertainty, and that vacuum requires masterful management.
Section 5. Doklam and border crisis readiness, winning before the confrontation.
Shifting our focus to the northern frontiers and incidents like the Doklam standoff, a very well-known military axiom emerges. Border crises are frequently won or lost years before the actual confrontation even begins. It requires sustained capability preparation, aggressive border infrastructure development, and proactive resource allocation. Think about it. If a nation is only reacting after hostile forces have mobilized in harsh terrains, well, it's already surrendered a crucial strategic advantage.
The author asserts that strategic weakness at the border is rarely just a localized military failure. It reflects much deeper institutional choices about exactly where and how a state allocates its resources. Deterrence is not just rhetoric delivered from a podium in the Capitol. It's a physical, undeniable reality. It is built through visible capability, paved roads carved into the mountains, and relentless, sustained preparation.
Section 6. Reforming the national security state, the urgent need for change. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Tewari lays out a specific roadmap to cure that institutional fragmentation we discussed earlier. He diagnoses the limits of improvisation and says the system requires clear legal authorization for intelligence operations, along with stronger structured oversight mechanisms. It has to mandate deep interagency integration, moving way beyond mere cooperation. Vitally, the system must foster rigorous dissenting strategic debate internally, rather than just relying on comfortable echo chambers.
The core warning of the text is distilled right here. A national security system must be explicitly designed to learn from its failures. A state that relies on ad hoc improvisation during crises will eventually exhaust its luck, and unfortunately, it's the citizens who ultimately pay the price. Professionalism at the highest levels requires institutional reform, and executing that reform, that demands immense political courage to break the inertia of past mistakes.
National security is not a single event. It is a continuous, unforgiving process of preparation and judgment. If the structural lessons of the last 20 years are ignored, the cost of hesitation will only grow steeper. So, we're left with a defining question for the future of the subcontinent's security. Will the state internalize the hard lessons of these flashpoints, or is it destined to risk repeating them?